Everyone keeps repeating the same claim. China has already peaked. Growth is slowing, the population is aging, the property sector is under pressure, debt risks are rising. You've heard this narrative countless times. But what if the real story is the complete opposite? What if the most significant shift in global economic power is only now entering its most critical and risky phase? And more importantly, why are so many experts overlooking what's right in front of them? Here's where mainstream analysis goes wrong. They evaluate national strength the way investors evaluate quarterly earnings. GDP falls from 8.4% to 5.2%, and suddenly the conversation turns to collapse. But real geopolitical power doesn't move quarter by quarter. It evolves through systems, deep, layered, and deliberately constructed systems. Stay with me, because what you're about to see reframes everything. To understand modern China, you only need to follow three forces that are almost never examined together. First, the manufacturing capture system. Second, the infrastructure lock-in strategy. Third, the technological substitution engine. Each of these alone is formidable, but together, they explain why the idea that China has already peaked could be one of the biggest strategic misinterpretations of this decade. Let's begin with the first system, manufacturing capture. Most people believe China became the world's factory simply because labor was cheap. That's the simplified entry-level explanation. Cheap labor helped in 2001, but it doesn't explain dominance in 2026. Manufacturing wages in coastal China increased more than 247% between 2008 and 2023. Economies built purely on cheap labor don't survive increases like that. So why didn't manufacturing leave? Here's the reality most people never hear. Manufacturing today isn't driven primarily by labor cost. It's driven by ecosystem density. When I spoke with supply chain executives sourcing electronics worldwide, one statistic kept coming up. In Shenzhen's industrial region alone, suppliers for highly advanced components can be reached within a 90-minute truck drive. No country in Europe or North America comes close to that level of clustering efficiency. Here's what that means in practice. Imagine you design a new electric scooter in Shenzhen. Your battery supplier, mold manufacturer, chip distributor, testing facility, packaging company, and export hub all exist inside one tightly integrated network. Prototype changes that take 21 days elsewhere can be completed in just 72 hours. Speed becomes the real competitive advantage, not labor cost. And here's the key point: speed compounds. A senior manufacturing consultant once told me privately that global companies often try to diversify production, moving perhaps 18% of assembly to Southeast Asia. But the most complex, high-value production almost always returns to China because redesign cycles become too slow outside that ecosystem. That's not accidental dependence. That's dependence created through industrial density. This is the manufacturing paradox. What outsiders assumed was powered by cheap labor is actually driven by industrial gravity. The more suppliers cluster together, the stronger the pull becomes. And once that gravity reaches a certain level, escaping it becomes extremely difficult. Here's the surprising part. Even during the tariff conflict with the United States, China's share of global manufacturing didn't collapse. By 2023, it still accounted for around 31% of total global manufacturing value added. Not 20%, not 25%, 31%. That kind of scale isn't temporary, it's structural leverage. When I visited factories near Beijing a few years ago, factory managers weren't talking about surviving trade tensions. They were discussing robotics integration, automation density, and digital systems monitoring thousands of suppliers in real time. That's not how a declining system behaves. That's how a consolidating system behaves. And this connects to something even larger, because manufacturing capture is only the outer layer. The second system operates at a much deeper strategic level, and it explains how manufacturing dominance transforms into geopolitical leverage far beyond exports. It works through ports, rail networks, energy routes, and financing systems that most headlines barely cover. The real question isn't whether China's growth rate slowed. The real question is what happens when the world realizes manufacturing dominance was only phase one, and infrastructure was designed to secure that advantage for decades. And this second system is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Here's the second force. Manufacturing creates production gravity. Infrastructure creates global reach. And once you understand this layer, the idea of China peaking starts to look overly simplistic. Let me ask you this. If a country slows internally but continues strengthening its control over global trade routes, is it actually weakening or strategically repositioning? Most people see infrastructure projects as simple construction. Bridges, ports, railways, expensive, sometimes inefficient, occasionally political, but modern infrastructure strategy isn't about concrete, it's about dependency. Here's the key idea. Whoever builds and finances the arteries of global trade often shapes the future direction of commerce. Consider the massive port expansion effort linked to Chinese overseas financing across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. Chinese-backed firms have funded or built dozens of critical logistics hubs, not symbolic ones, but operational choke points handling millions of shipping containers every year. A shipping expert told me something very direct. Control the loading schedules, and you influence the entire supply chain. That's not ideology, that's logistics. Now look at the numbers. Between 2013 and 2022, Chinese policy banks and state-linked lenders committed hundreds of billions of dollars to overseas infrastructure. But the real power isn't in the dollar amounts. It's in operational control. In several key regions, Chinese-built or financed ports now handle major shares of container traffic. Not small influence, significant influence. Stay with me because this is where it becomes critical. If manufacturing density locks companies into China's production system, infrastructure financing locks entire regions into its transportation system, and transportation systems shape political and economic choices. A maritime risk advisor told me that shipping risk models now consider who built the port, who operates it, and who maintains its digital systems, because control determines resilience. When I spoke with exporters in Southeast Asia, some quietly admitted something important. Even when factories move out of China, their goods often still move through logistics networks financed, operated, or digitally managed by Chinese-linked companies. That's the infrastructure loop. Production diversification doesn't automatically mean supply chain independence. This is the infrastructure paradox. The world believes it's reducing dependence on China while still relying on infrastructure China helped create. Here's the surprising part. Infrastructure influence grows slower than manufacturing dominance, but lasts much longer. Factories can move in 5 years. Ports shape trade flows for 30. And here's where mainstream analysis makes another mistake. They focus on whether individual projects make money. But the real goal isn't profit, it's network position. Airlines understand this well. Owning the busiest hub matters more than owning the most profitable individual flight. If you want to see geopolitical leverage, look at logistics software. Trade increasingly moves along routes optimized for financing relationships, insurance systems, and digital compatibility. And Chinese-linked infrastructure appears again and again in those routes. But even infrastructure isn't the deepest layer. Manufacturing creates production dependence. Infrastructure creates route dependence. But technology creates system dependence. Here's the key setup. A country doesn't need to dominate every technology. It only needs to dominate the industrial technologies everything else depends on. Batteries, grid equipment, robotics, power electronics, rare earth processing. If that technological system reaches critical mass, the global economy begins running on components tied to that ecosystem. So the real question isn't whether China built factories or financed ports. It's what happens when the technologies powering the next industrial era increasingly come from that same system. Now we reach the third force. This is where the story shifts from trade to control over the future industrial age. Let me ask you something. What if global dominance isn't decided by flashy consumer tech, but by control of the industrial components behind everything? Most people think technological leadership means smartphones, apps, or AI tools, but the real leverage lies in industrial substitution, replacing foreign technology domestically while supplying those same technologies globally. Industrial technology leadership isn't exciting to watch, but incredibly powerful to control. Consider rare earths. China processes roughly 68% of global rare earth minerals and more than 85% of refining capacity for critical magnet materials. These materials power electric vehicles, wind turbines, and advanced electronics. A senior energy expert told me something blunt. You can design the best electric car in the world, but if the magnets and components depend on Chinese supply chains, your production depends on them too. Manufacturers I spoke with admitted alternatives exist, but not at scale. Scale is everything. Remember earlier, speed compounds. In industrial technology, scale compounds even more. Technological substitution works both ways. China reduces reliance on foreign imports internally, while the world increases reliance on Chinese industrial supply externally. That creates dual dependence. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Owning supply chains often matters more than inventing technologies. China produces over 75% of global lithium-ion batteries. Not half, more than 3/4. That scale shapes pricing, availability, and standards. And this connects directly to the peaking narrative. Demographics affect consumers. Property affects domestic balance sheets. But industrial dominance operates on much longer timelines. Factories and processing plants operate for decades. And when all three forces combine, a flywheel forms. Manufacturing supports infrastructure. Infrastructure supports exports. Exports increase demand for Chinese industrial technology. The system reinforces itself. This is the China system's flywheel. And here's what makes policymakers uncomfortable. This system doesn't need rapid GDP growth, it only needs stability. So maybe the world has been measuring the wrong indicators. Maybe power was never about GDP growth. Maybe it was always about system control. And once you see that, the conclusion becomes unavoidable: manufacturing capture, infrastructure lock in, technological substitution. Together, they form what I call the industrial gravity model. Power comes from ecosystem weight. The heavier the ecosystem, the harder it becomes to escape. Switching brands is easy. Switching industrial systems is like changing engines mid-flight. If this model is correct, China isn't peaking. It's stabilizing its position. And from here, three futures are possible: multipolar balance, hidden dependence, or competing industrial blocks. None require explosive Chinese growth, only structural positioning. So the real question isn't how fast China grows, it's whether the world can truly reduce dependence. So far, that shift is slower than headlines suggest. Now I want to hear your view. Is the world truly diversifying or just reshuffling? Comment below, and if you want deeper analysis beyond headlines, subscribe and stay with us. Because the next breakdown goes even further into the economic battleground shaping the future.